Sorry, I'm Mike. Hi, everybody. As she said, I'm Anthony Breznican. I'm a senior writer at Entertainment Weekly, and my beat is the Oscar beat this time of year. So last year around this time, I was talking to a friend of mine at Paramount. It was a few months before Nebraska played at Cannes. Nobody had seen it. A couple pictures had come out. She said, Bruce Dern, Will Forte, you're going to see them in a whole different way, but June Squibb, keep an eye out for June Squibb. And I said, well, who's June Squibb? And anybody who loves movies now will never ask that question again. So let's hear it for June Squibb.
Thank you.
So June, I think if you go and look at your IMDb page, it really starts around 1990. And I think the question is, where have you been all of our lives before that?
Before that, I was on stage.
You've had a long career.
A long career on stage, yeah.
And we're going to go through all of that, and I have questions that the kind folks out here have filled out for later. But I wanted to just go back to the very beginning. You grew up in Illinois.
Vandalia.
Vandalia. What was Vandalia like?
Well, it was a small Midwestern town and sort of southern. It was south central Illinois. And I think we usually had about 5,000 or 6,000 people. I always felt that I had been adopted. Because I always felt I didn't belong there. And I think around 6, I started saying that. And of course, my mother and father were appalled because I hadn't been adopted. I was their child. But I really, from the beginning, I just felt that there was a world out there that I wanted to be a part of.
And how did you know about that world?
Well, I read a lot. I really did. But I also always felt I was an actress. I mean, it wasn't, I want to do this, or it was, I am an actress. And so someday, I'll be out there doing it.
Did you go see movies? Was there a movie house in town?
I did see movies. At the beginning of my life, I didn't see many stage plays. I did later on in St. Louis. But I did see movies, and I did everything I could. First grade, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And everything in school, that I could do, I did. And I was a cheerleader and a majorette, anything to show off.
And what kind of movies inspired you, if that's where you saw? Because when I was a little kid and I would watch a movie, I wouldn't think I'm watching actors. I would think this is a documentary. This is Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is actually happening. I mean, once you get a little bit older and you realize the difference between fantasy and reality. But when did movies stop being fantasy and you started thinking, this is something I could do?
Well, I think from the beginning. It never occurred to me that I couldn't do it. And what I saw on Saturday afternoon were the Westerns and a serial. And this is what I saw for years. My family sent me to the movies every Saturday afternoon. And then later on, I remember seeing Charlie Chaplin. And I don't remember, it was Gone with the Wind. I do remember we went to St. Louis to see Gone with the Wind when it first opened.
You had to go there to find it.
Yes,
It wasn't playing in Vandalia.
It wasn't playing in Vandalia, Illinois, no.
So that's interesting because that's a different time. Today, if we want to watch a movie, we'll call it up on our cell phones.
Yeah, or,
But
DVD it.
It was tough to get access to that.
It was very much so. But I read. I think reading is what saved me through the whole thing.
And what did you like to read?
Almost anything. I was fascinated by Russia and China, and I have no idea why.
Because it was far away.
Yeah, I guess so. Anything as far as I could get. But I did read everything. And the library in our little town, they were wonderful because they allowed me to read adult books, which they were not supposed to. But I had read everything that was my age appropriate, so they let me read adult books.
Now, You said in high school you would do plays. You were a cheerleader. What kind of plays were you in as a teenage girl?
Kind Lady. That's one that I think is still being done in stock occasionally. And I can't remember the others. They would also, have school fairs and things, and we would all do hula dances. And I was a tap dancer, so I tap danced at a lot of those.
Now, did you have a teacher? Did you have an instructor who said, here's how you dance, here's how you
No, I
sing?
took dance, and I also had an aunt who tap danced and whistled through her teeth.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Good. So
And
she was her own accompaniment.
Yes, and she taught me, and she loved nothing more than I got up and tap danced with her while she whistled.
No, I saw you on the CBS morning show Sunday morning, and you were talking about your grandparents would take you out.
Yes.
You tell the story. They'd go out and hit the bar and bring young June with them.
My father's parents would take me to bars around Vandalia, and I would get up on the bar and tap dance. And they got free beer. And I got applause, so everybody was happy.
How old are you at this point?
Oh, probably 6 or 7.
I have a 4-year-old daughter, so in a couple of years I'm going to try that.
Yes.
But did you enjoy that, or were you
I
like,
loved it. Are you
yeah?
kidding? Sure.
Now, at what point do you leave Vandalia?
I left Vandalia and sort of started trying to figure out how to get where I wanted to be. And I spent a little time in Chicago and a very little time in a college. And then someone told me about the Cleveland Playhouse. And they, at that time, were non-union, but they were a regional theater. And in '51, I went to the Cleveland Playhouse. And that really started my professional career.
Do you get a job at the Playhouse right away, or?
Well, you go in as a student, and the first year, you don't pay them, but you work your ass off.
Doing tasks,
Everything,
upkeep, that sort of thing?
Everything. And I ended up in the prop department, but I acted a lot. And the second year is called a fellowship year, and they give you some money, about half of what they pay the staff. And then I had 3 years on staff there.
Now, it sounds like you were eager to get out as soon as possible, but was that a scary leap for you to leave what you knew, even though you'd been imagining this great big world out there to try?
I didn't find it scary, no. In fact, I felt more comfortable when I got to Cleveland. And when I got to New York, I felt, my God, I should have been here years ago. I mean, I just loved it,
Were you encouraged to pursue this, or did you have to fight against the expectations
I
of
think
your
I had to
family?
fight against family to do any of it, yeah.
Now, that's something you and Bruce Dern
Have in common,
have in
yes,
common.
yes.
I don't know what social strata your family was in, but as many people may know, Bruce Dern comes from a very wealthy
Very
family.
wealthy family, yeah.
He's played a lot of creeps and losers and weirdos over the years
Yeah.
in the movies, but in real life, he says the closest casting to his real life was The Great Gatsby. He was a
Gatsby,
wealthy guy.
And his family hated the fact that he was an actor, even when he was doing films.
Yeah.
And getting, quite a bit of renown for it.
They didn't consider that to be serious work.
No, it wasn't something he should be doing.
He said they told him he had 1 year to become famous, and
Oh,
it didn't
I didn't
work.
know that.
He says, well, that didn't work. I think he said you have 1 year to become Jimmy Stewart.
Yes, probably.
And he worked for several
Yeah.
years and became Bruce Dern. But what was the resistance from your family? Why were they?
Well, it was an unknown to them. They had no idea. And even when they came to Cleveland to see me work, and I got married there, so they came for that. And they had no idea what was going on. I mean, they liked the people, and that wasn't a problem, but they had no sense of what the life was like or what I was doing. And I think that they wanted me to stay there with them, to stay in Illinois.
What kind of work did they do?
My father started out, the first thing I remember, he was a manager of a clothing store, a men's clothing store. But then he joined the Navy at 39, so in the Second World War. And when he came back, he became an insurance salesman, and very successfully, I must say.
Yeah.
He became a very successful businessman.
And your mother, was she just, as the times would have dictated, a stay-at-home
Stay at
mother?
home, basically. She played the piano, and she did play for silent films when she was younger. I was not aware of it, but that was before I was born.
Do you think she shared this ambition of yours?
I think she did. I think that was part of the problem, probably.
Yeah.
You know.
Resented maybe
I
that
think
she
she
didn't
did,
follow
yeah.
it and you did.
And I left. I did it. You know, I got out.
So do you remember, so you said you do your fellowship at the Cleveland Playhouse, and you're doing work there to pay your dues. What was your big break?
At the
Your
Cleveland
first
Playhouse?
break, I guess, if not big.
Well, what happened was a young man came to the Playhouse as an actor, but he was a brilliant musician. He became one of the foremost Broadway conductors through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, Jack Lee. And he came to the Playhouse. They wanted to start doing musicals. And we became very close friends. He became very close to my husband and I. And he wanted us to be a part of it. And I danced well enough, you know, that I could be of help to them, but I'd never sung. And he sort of made me sing. But I ended up doing all of the comedians and all the musicals and became very successful in Cleveland as the funny lady.
Hot in Cleveland.
Yeah, right, right.
What type of musicals?
Well, I think
Any
the
that we still know today?
First thing we did was Best Foot Forward, and we did Bloomer Girl, Finian's Rainbow, Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and then they did some. They did a Mall and the Night Visitors, and some of the others, the operatic, going towards opera. They did Regina, I know.
So your previous stage experience, tap dancing on the bar for your grandparents'
Came
beer.
in handy.
What was that? Was it the same rush and the same thrill performing on a stage
It was,
in front of
and
all
I
those
had
people?
never really sung before, so it was. I enjoyed it tremendously. And well, when I went into New York, then that's what I did.
And now that leads me, at a certain point, did you say, all right, it's time to dust Cleveland off my boots and move on to the next place?
Well, a group of us felt that we had sort of gotten what we could get there. And I think I was there 5 years, most of them were there 4, 3, but about 15 people left at the same time, and everybody went to New York.
You mentioned your husband. What did he do? Was he involved in the theater as
He
well?
was at the Playhouse. He came as a fellowship student and stayed on in staff.
Now, so you head to New York. What's that experience like? What was the catalyst for taking that leap? So you said they began to feel like there was...
a group of us just felt that we could get nothing more from the Playhouse. And my husband and I went to Stock to get our equity cards. And so we did that and then went on to New York from there.
What was that experience like, just moving to New York? Did you know where to go or where to find an apartment?
There was enough of us, going that we sort of had a base. And when my husband and I came into New York, Jack Lee had an apartment for us. And then the three of us lived together again, in 2 or 3 different apartments there.
And this would have been the mid-50s?
This was the late 50s.
Late 50s?
I think we got there in 56 and the beginning 60s.
Yeah. What was it like being there? This is the center of the theatrical
Yes,
world in
yeah.
the United States.
Well, it was very exciting, and being a part of the musical world was tremendously exciting. I mean, you had some fantastic musicals being written and done then.
Yeah.
And so I sort of felt when I got there, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I will fit in. But it just sort of happened, and I started fitting in with the musicals.
It helps to know people like Jack Lee.
Yes, who was
guide you and
rising all the
suggest
time, yeah.
where to go. So what was auditioning like?
Well, that's funny. Jack, you never auditioned in Cleveland. You were just handed a role and said, this is what you're going to do. So we got to New York, and Jack said, "You've got to audition because you've never done it." And he said, "They have chorus auditions." And he said, "You're union, so you can get into them." He said, "Now, you'll never get a chorus job because you don't sing well enough." And I agreed with him. But he said, "You've got to do this." And I said, "I'll do it if you play for me." And he said, "I can't go to chorus auditions and play the piano." I said, "Then I won't go." So Jack Lee and I pranced through all the auditions.
Why couldn't he go? Is that
Well,
just...
you go to a chorus audition and they say 16 bars, and the guy's sitting there playing. It's very fast.
Yeah.
And here I am dragging a pianist in with me. He asks the other guy to move. He sits down, and 16 bars, and we get up and leave. So he agreed to do it because he knew I wouldn't do it otherwise.
Did that make you look like big time? Here you are bringing your
I
own
don't know.
piano
Either
player.
thought that or we were crazy. I don't know which.
So some of your first Broadway show, I guess this was off Broadway, 1958, The Boyfriend. Mm-hmm. That's one of your early big credits. Tell us about
it. Yeah, big success.
Why was that important in your career? Why was that a big stepping stone?
Well, I had worked before. I had worked off Broadway, and I had done stock, certainly, but I had never done anything in New York that was noticed, that people really, saw and said, "That's good," or "That's June Squibb doing this." And Gus Shermer was an agent, but he also directed some things, and he was putting together a summer stock tour of The Boyfriend, all the time intending then to put it off Broadway when it was through. And I got that playing Dulcie, who was the dippy comedienne, basically, of the thing. And we were very successful on the summer tour, and then we did open very soon off Broadway.
Did that lead to another job?
It led to, I think, my whole career in New York, basically, because I was with it for over a year, and then they brought me out here, and I did what was considered off-Broadway out here.
Pretty far off Broadway.
Yeah, pretty far off Broadway. And, but it was terribly successful, and I think it really, strangely enough, people still talk about it.
So before having that success, did you have to work? Were there other jobs that you did?
No, I modeled. I did do that, and I did those crazy True Romance magazines.
True Detective,
True
right?
Detective. And I was Santa Claus's helper at Lord and Taylor. Things like that. The unemployment office used to look askance at me when I would come in and say, "Oh, I'm Santa Claus's helper. Can you do anything with that?"
And what were the True Detective? What were the modeling jobs like? That's pretty spicy.
It is.
Stuff,
It
right?
was. Well,
like low cut.
At the time, yes, it was. Now I'm sure it's like nothing, but. You could spend the day in bed with a young man while they took your picture. And then we're lying there talking, about it and what's happening and everything. And, the one I remember, because we found it recently, it's just, I was standing over a table with the most pained look on my face I think I've ever had. So, they were to make these stories come more real.
Yeah, so you're posing as characters in these
from the stories,
in these pulpy short stories, essentially, right?
And they were so cheap. So cheap.
Did they pay well though?
They did. They paid pretty well at that point.
Being cheap can pay really well.
Exactly.
You're willing to do it.
Yeah.
Was it awkward for you, or were you just totally comfortable with that?
I was comfortable with it. Yeah. In fact, I used to do dance auditions too, and I did one, and they told me I had the job. And then I found out it was at a burlesque house in New Jersey, to dance in the chorus.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, that's not bad. That'll pay, So I went home. Oh, my husband put a kibosh on it, right? You're not going to work in a burlesque house.
Because playing a stripper would just be beneath you.
But you're right.
And then you played Electra and Gypsy
Yeah.
with that Ethel Merman,
Yeah.
and a stripper who her gimmick was
The light bulbs.
she would shake her curves and make the lights come on.
Make the light bulbs glow.
What was the costume like that you had to wear in that? And that was
Well,
on
this
Broadway,
this
right? That
was
was
on
with Ethel
Broadway,
Merman.
Yeah, and it was the first costume. I've seen some of these costumes since, and they're much lighter because when they first did it, I think it was hard to do. And it was very heavy. I had packs.
For batteries?
All over my, front and back and the bottom trunks. And then it was long sleeves so that I could push the lights like that.
And you have, dozens of light bulbs hanging off you
Yes,
too. That adds up too.
Yeah.
So
It was very heavy.
uh-huh. So what was it like performing in that?
Well, it was great. That number every night, every time you performed it, the audience just went crazy.
Yeah.
And I was working with Maria Kornilova and Faith Dane, and they were the original in their roles. And it was just great fun. And it's beautifully choreographed.
For those who haven't seen Gypsy for a while, this is the scene where Gypsy shows up and says, well, I'm not going to be a stripper. And they say, well, we've got to have a gimmick.
Yeah.
And each one has their own trumpet playing and
Ballet.
and yours
My
is
lights.
your lights. Would the lights ever break?
No, but one time, I always had to go, before I went on stage, I had to go be checked by an electrician. I'm serious. In the stairwell. I mean, I didn't even get a room. So I would stand there and he would check everything. And one night he started checking. He said, "Get out of that thing." I said, "What do you mean? I just got into." He said, "Get out of the costume right now." I mean, he was very scared. He pushed me to the dressers. And we got out of it. He said that I could have been killed.
Why? What was
Well, there was
wrong?
something loose. And he said that
Could have been electrocuted?
Yes, yeah. So he fixed it, and I got back into it and did the number.
Did you feel a little more nervous? Definitely, that's not a gimmick you want to have, is being electrocuted on stage.
That only happened once.
Yeah. So after that, where does your career go? You're on Broadway. You're in this hit Broadway show with a star, Ethel Merman. Did you feel a desire? You've been doing musical theater and dancing since you were a little kid, but at a certain point, you decided to make a transition.
Yes, I did.
And that was your husband,
My second
Charlie.
husband, Charles Kakatsakis, yeah. We actually met doing a musical in stock, and he was very determined that I was not going to accept what I was doing, and that would be my life. He felt that I could become a really fine actress if I worked at it. And he was quite brilliant. He really was. And
he was an acting teacher.
he was an acting teacher, and he was known for screaming, "Don't act, don't act." And his students used to give him sweatshirts saying, "Don't act," across the front all the time. But he also, I remember once, I would go into class, actually go into his class, and we would end up yelling at each other because I was so frustrated, trying to learn. And he simply took everything away from you that you've ever done before.
What was it you say, "Don't act"? I think, we all have our own interpretation of what that means. But really, he was part of that generation that was changing the way performance was done.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
He was.
And what was that evolution? So even screen acting was a different type of performance than what came after, thanks to people like him. So what was he doing? How would you characterize what he was changing?
He was trained in the Northeast, but then he was at the studio. So he did have that influence. And it's just simply the most realistic, honest way that you can work.
Was he employing the method acting, or?
Well, by that time he had taken from all these different things, and Bobby Lewis, I had an opportunity to study with Bobby Lewis, and I thought, well, I could just stay with Charlie, and he made me go study with Bobby Lewis. He said, you've got to, Bobby was already, I think, in his 80s or early 90s, and he had been ill, he'd had a heart, and he was coming back to New York to teach. And he said, you can't miss this, you can't not go study with him. So I spent most of 1 year with Bobby Lewis. But Charlie, it was funny because I would say, well, if you don't act, what do you do? And he said, well, on stage or on set, you listen to the other actors. And he said, if any of those actors talk to you, answer them. And that was it.
Now, right around this same time, out here on the West Coast, Bruce Dern was part of the Actors Studio.
Yeah.
Elia Kazan, he was taking lessons out here with Jack Nicholson and other actors who became very famous. And he was also in New York. Did you two ever cross paths?
Never. Not that I know of. I mean, not that I remember.
So you could have been at the
But now
same...
he says that he saw me do Gypsy. He said he remembered that.
Oh, wow.
And at the Wright Theater, because they opened at the Broadway, and then I was at the Imperial.
It's interesting. So I just wondered if you were ever in the same circles with each
not
other
that
and
I-
then reunited all these years
No.
later. So you began moving away from musical theater and comedies and taking on more serious roles. When did you feel like you had a handle on that?
Well, the first thing I did was do off Broadway, and then I started doing regional theater. And after I had done probably 4 or 5 years of regional theater, where I would do 1 or maybe 2 shows, out in a regional theater, people forgot I did musicals, and which was strange. But they accepted me as an actress.
Was there any resistance within that community? Like, well, June, we know her. She's a
No,
comedian.
and
were
there
you typecast?
there was when I was doing it, because at that period in New York, if you did musicals, they were not interested in you as a straight actress at all.
Did you have to perform a certain role that changed people's perspective before they gave you that benefit of the doubt?
No, I don't think so. I think also starting to do film helped tremendously. And I think that, again, then, made people feel that I am an actress. There's no fear about hiring me for this.
I was going to ask you, in between all this time, when you're doing all this stage work, did you ever feel the allure to come to Los Angeles, appear in television, or appear in movies?
Not really. I really didn't.
Why? Just that wasn't
Well-
you? You preferred the stage, or did that...
I was working all the time on stage, and then when I started doing film, it was all in New York. And there was a lot of film. This was the late 80s, early 90s when I started, and there was a lot of film being done in New York then.
Now, you have a son, Harry Katsakis,
Right.
and he's a filmmaker as well. When you had him, did you take any time and say, okay, well, now I'll be a mom, or did you continue to be a working mother?
I continued to work. And my husband, because he was teaching, didn't have a 9-to-5 job, so he took care of Harry quite a bit. But I think I did a commercial when I was like this.
When you were pregnant with
Pregnant,
him?
yeah.
What was the commercial?
I have no idea at this point. I
Quite a
remember
memorable
snow.
sales job
Right,
there.
yeah.
Did you do a lot of commercials, or was that a
I
rarity?
did. I used to call myself, I can't think of the word now that I called myself, but I would do them, and I was never like, oh, wow, she's making a fortune on commercials. But I would shoot, maybe 3 or 4 a year, maybe one would run and, bring in some money.
So when you started doing film, was that another recalibration of your career, or did that happen more just by chance?
It was not by chance. I felt that a lot of the stage people were now doing film because, as I said, there was so much in there. And I went to my agent, Phil Edelman at the Gage Group, and said, I think I should be doing film. And so he got me an audition with Woody Allen.
This is for
Oh,
Alice.
yeah, right away.
And you played Hilda. Tell us.
Yes.
Tell us about the part you played. Who was Hilda, and how did she fit into Woody's
Hilda
film?
was their housekeeper, and it was.
This is Mia Farrow.
Mia Farrow
and
William
William Hurt.
William Hurt, and they had this apartment which was all set up on a sound stage, but so that you could go from room just like that. He wanted to be able to shoot the
To
whole
track
thing,
them.
track the whole thing. And I was in the kitchen a lot, and but I was supposed to work 3 days, and he kept me there for 6 weeks. And he kept putting me, you know, in little scenes. I'd come in and say, you know, 1 or 2 words and then leave. And it was a wonderful experience. I loved it. I loved him. He was great.
Well, what made it wonderful? What was it?
Well, I was successful.
Felt
No,
good?
I mean, that felt, you know, I felt, wow, this is great, you know.
Did it feel like a different style of acting?
No. Because I feel, you know, you're either a good actor or a bad actor.
But you hear people say there's a different way of performing on stage
you know,
than you do on
when
screen.
you're on stage, you're aware of the audience, and you're throwing some of it out there, and you're projecting differently.
Was there anything you didn't know about acting for the screen when you played Hilda that by the end you
I knew.
understood? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was bamboozled by all the wires, for one thing. I mean, you know, going from the dressing room to the set, and they were all the assistants were so trying to help me get through, you know, all of this. It became, every time I went to set, I had people on both hands trying to get me through. And I think I finally accomplished that, where I could do it by myself.
Just getting over the gear was
and
very practical.
I could go by myself. And now I could get on any set by myself.
And you and I... Very good. You and I have talked about this already. As you all know, Philip Seymour Hoffman just passed away very unexpectedly, and I was working that day writing about him and writing about his career and legacy, and I went back to look at some of his early film performances, and one of them was in Scent of a Woman, and it's been years since I've seen that film, so I wanted to, you know, remind myself who he played, so I was searching for clips from that movie, and there's a scene early in the film where he and Chris O'Donnell are trying to prevent a teacher from seeing the prank that's being set up. And as the teacher is walking out of the darkness toward Philip Seymour Hoffman, and he's intercepting her, I go, that looks like June Squibb. And sure enough, there you were.
There it was, yeah.
And I got in touch with you through Harry, and you had some very beautiful memories of working with him. That was his first screen role. He had a couple come out right around the same time, but that was your second screen role,
second one,
and his first. Can you share some memories of working with a very young novice?
Very young.
Phil Seymour
for
Hoffman.
one thing, I knew he was a great actor. I just simply, you know, watching him there, and we had that scene in the courtroom at the end, and I watched all of that, of course. I was on stage for it, and I called him a teddy bear, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he and Chris O'Donnell used to take my name, Mrs. Hunsacker, and do everything you possibly could do to make me laugh. They thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And they used to invite me to go to the bar with them, you know. We all lived in a motel together. But they were fun. They were fun kids, you know.
Yeah, and Martin Brest was the director of
Yes.
that film, and you worked with him again a few
Twice,
years later in Meet Joe
Meet
Black.
Joe Black.
And in that one, you were performing opposite Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins.
So
yes.
remind us of the character you played in Meet Joe Black.
He was the owner of this huge mansion, and I was his housekeeper. I did a lot of housekeeping.
Why did you? I was going to say, did you have a domestic vibe?
I guess I did. I looked good in the uniform.
There you go. And so you're performing with him. He also has a lot a rich stage background,
Yeah.
but had been in a lot of films at that point. Any recollections of working with Anthony Hopkins?
I remember, I don't think, Brad Pitt was in it, and he was a sweet man. God, he was a kid, but he was great. But somebody came up to Anthony Hopkins on location, on set, out on the grass, and called him sir. And he got so pissed off. And he went through this whole thing about, do not call me sir.
Oh,
And I'll
really?
never forget that. He did it very well. I mean, it wasn't, angry or ugly, but it was...
But firm.
But firm, yes, it certainly was firm.
And why? Just he wanted to be
I think
Tony?
he wanted to be, I think he wanted to be one of the actors, and we were doing a scene actually between Brad and he and I out on the grass. I think I was carrying trays, I'm not sure. But I think he truly did just want to be one of us out there working.
Now, another film you were in was The Age of Innocence. I think that was 1993, a Martin Scorsese film.
yeah.
All of these people who are in the Oscar race again are just a part of your history,
Right,
and
yeah.
you've worked with. And you played another maid.
A maid.
You were Miriam Margolyes's maid.
Maid,
Am I
yes.
remembering that right?
Yeah, that's right, no.
And-
she was a hoot.
Yeah.
God, she's funny. But he had a thing in that movie with the pictures. If you remember, all the sets, these huge oils, gorgeous pictures. And he had one in the hall that I was to stand in front of and deliver my dialogue. And he didn't like the picture. So we were on location at this big mansion north of New York. And so he said, stop, we're not going to shoot this here. So they set up on a set. They made the thing, the hallway, and the picture that he wanted. And they brought me in, and he directed me. And, I thought that was gracious and lovely of him because it's the kind of thing, he could have had an assistant do it. But he was there and telling me what he wanted.
So now, at this point, you've worked with a lot of very interesting filmmakers. What did you notice about the different styles that they employed to make their films? Woody Allen, Martin Scorsese, Martin Brest. How would you describe those three? What made them distinctive from your perspective?
Well, Woody Allen, the first thing he said to me was, I don't care what you do, just be real.
Don't act.
And, yeah,
I've heard that before.
And I think that's what he wants. And so he didn't really direct you, per se. I mean, you did the scenes, and if he had a change or something. But he also, he had no idea that you had to know where to stand and go. If you had to exit, or if you had to stand. And Mia Farrow was always trying to get him to slow down and tell us where we were supposed to be standing and where we were supposed to exit and everything. And he just has this thing going, and to him, that. And,
Yeah.
We didn't. Nobody knew.
How about Scorsese? You said he
I
took
just
time to
felt
direct you.
He took time to direct me in this teeny little thing, and to make sure that the picture behind was what he wanted and perfect. And I just found him very gracious, and I was impressed.
Was he
with
somebody
that.
who asked for a lot of takes, or did he move along fairly quickly?
He
like
moved
Woody?
fairly, and it was not hard. I mean, it wasn't a difficult scene at all. So.
And did you start to think, were you still performing on stage at this time?
Yes, but
or were you fully devoted to film?
Well,
and
no,
television?
I was doing some. I did, I think, Gory Stories on Broadway during this period. I think it was then.
And you were doing some television. I know you have
Yeah.
some Law and Order credits,
Yeah.
like every New York actor.
That's a big joke. That really, everybody has to have a Law and Order at least once.
I think, yeah, at least once.
At
I love it
least
when an actor turns up twice and they play different people.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. That's what I did.
You showed up twice. So who
Yeah.
were you? Do you remember your first Law and Order part?
Yes, it was Jerry Orbach, and I can't think of his name now, the one from Good Wife.
Oh, Chris Noth.
Chris Noth. And we were in a shoe store, or shoe store. We sold shoes, and I was behind the counter, and they came in about something. I don't remember what.
So were you a suspect or a
No,
witness?
no, I was giving them information.
Oh, I see.
And then the other one was Jerry still, and that very handsome Latin actor.
Benjamin Bratt.
Yes, yes. And I was behind the counter. And it was like a DMV or something like that, and they were getting information again.
Quite the informant.
Yes, right. Ask me anything.
Now, you then, In and Out is another film. You played Cousin
yes.
Gretchen.
Yes.
Now, again, this is one, before I came to talk to you, I'm like, I gotta find her in this movie. You're in there with the family watching the Oscars, right?
We're Debbie's family.
You're on the
Debbie
couch
Reynolds,
or on a
yeah.
chair with like a kid, right? Is that right? So tell me about Cousin Gretchen and what that experience was like.
Well, that was great. The only thing is, I think I was supposed to shoot like 2 months, and I ended up shooting 6. We did a lot of, we did like versions of the film. We did about 3 different versions.
Oh, wow.
The director and Scott Rudin and Kevin Kline. So we kept doing stuff over again.
And why was that? Was it because it wasn't working?
No, I think that they each had ideas that were valid and that they wanted to try. So we did.
So you made 3 films.
Basically,
Essentially.
yeah.
What would have been the difference between them? One more serious? Or
Yes, I
more...
think Kevin wanted more serious. Frank Oz, who I adored, just kept screaming, "It's a fucking farce! It's a fucking farce!" Because everybody was, we get a very real scene.
I'm hearing that in the Miss Piggy voice
Yeah,
for some reason.
He did that for me.
He did?
We were working one night about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was standing behind me, and I said, "Do you ever do Miss Piggy for anyone?" And in Miss
And he said,
Piggy's
"You're
voice,
fine."
he said, "No, June, I don't, but for you, I will." And he did a whole scene of Miss Piggy.
And then you said, "Now do Yoda."
"Yeah, right."
Then a few years later, you're working steadily.
Yeah, pretty
and
steady film.
About Schmidt, I think that's got to be the meatiest part you had up until
Yeah,
that point.
yeah.
Playing Jack Nicholson's wife, even though she, spoiler alert, disappears fairly early in the film.
Yeah.
That's a big role, and I wondered what kind of thinking you did to get into her head, because you're a live wire and she is not. And I wondered how you thought about her.
Well, I used to think, I remember when I first read it, and I sort of thought, what can you do? I really didn't, when I first read it, know exactly how to deal with her. And then as I read it more, and then actually worked on it, and I work on the script itself over and over and over again, and I really began to love her. And then what I love is the fact she had the affair. I mean, I think that is so wonderful that was written in that way. He doesn't know it, and then he finds out after she dies that she had another life.
Which is devastating, because then there's no reconciliation that can be had.
From either side.
Yeah. What was your favorite scene to shoot?
In that, I think the scene in the car, the trailer.
The
Yeah,
toast
that-
scene,
yeah, that was
with
fun.
Nicholson.
Yeah.
Now, Nicholson is such a character. I wondered if you have any recollections of him. What is he like to work with? We're used to seeing him as
He's a
as
wonderful
Jack.
actor. He's a really good actor. And we actually improvised a lot of that. And there was a scene, I think, with some friends. We were having dinner at our house, and we improvised the whole thing, which was pretty heavy. I mean, being with Jack and just sort of let's go, And but he was a gentleman. To me, he certainly was. He was lovely. He couldn't have been sweeter. And the night before I first shot, he sent me a huge bouquet of flowers to the hotel where I was staying.
That's sweet. Now this is probably a silly question because you've been an actress for a long time and met a lot of people, but that's someone who is a movie star, who's an icon. Did you ever get starstruck, either with him or with any other actor that you worked with, just somebody that you idolized and finally got to play with on stage?
Well, it was funny because when I was a kid, do you remember Farley Granger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I thought he was just it, when I was a teenager. And I did a stock show with him, and we did a touring show. And he was a sweet man. But I mean, it was funny because when I first saw him, I thought, this is Farley Granger. My God. But then he just, it was so many years.
You stop seeing them as the screen presence and you start to see them as
And
a human
Van
being.
Johnson was another one. Remember how cute he was and everybody loved him? And I did a showboat with him. He played Captain Andy and I played Parthy. And we did a tour again, and it was great fun. And he wore red socks, as he always did. And again, the same thing, because I had such a crush on him. And then to see him, and be with him and work with him.
Now, I wondered what your first impression of Alexander Payne was working with him on About Schmidt.
About Schmidt?
Yeah.
Well,
that was fairly early in his career, too, just a couple of movies in.
He had done, that was his third film. I was at New Line, is where I did the taping. And then they wanted me to come back, and he was there. And we met in this room, and we talked. We talked about things. And then they did another taping of me, with him directing me to a certain degree.
What kind of direction would he give you?
Very simple. Again, he's someone that wants it as real as you can possibly get it. Yeah.
Did you stay in touch with him over the years between that and Nebraska?
We didn't personally, but we were always saying hello through other people. Somebody would say, I just saw Alexander and he sends his love, and I would say the same thing. Like Margot Martindale, who's a dear friend, and she did that Paris thing with him. So, that kind of acknowledgement we had.
Now, she is the one, correct me if I'm wrong, Margot Martindale, who passed on this script to you for Nebraska. Is that right?
She didn't actually. What she did was tell me about it. I didn't see the script then.
Had she auditioned for it?
No, he sent her the script really early on. And I would say probably 2 years before they started casting even. And she just said, Alexander sent me a script, and I'm not old enough for it, and I'm not right for it, and you're perfect. And so she just said, tell your agents. And so I did, and we talked about it. But it was quite a bit of space there before he really started casting.
Well, Bruce Dern told me the story that he got the script 10 years ago, went to Alexander's office after reading it, and brought him a little toy truck. Since what he wants is a truck.
Yeah.
And of course, Bruce says, I went and gave it to his receptionist. I didn't get to see Alexander, but in his way, he said, don't take this home to your fucking kid. Make sure you give it to Alexander.
He always, he always adds that.
and then a decade goes by, and he's very blunt about it. He says all of a sudden he's making The Descendants and no role for Brucey. And it was a long time before he finally made this film. So it was a few years after. So it was a few years after you saw the script that even you began. What, serious auditions
well,
for
I
it?
didn't, because he will tell this. He didn't think I was right for it, because he thought I was that little lady from About Schmidt. That's
sweet.
Too sweet. He did. And he's told me that. I mean, he's told it in interviews. And I don't know what happened. I know my agent, who's sitting right there, Martin Gage, that he, made a lot of calls, but it was never, it was always, I think, June's not right for this.
So your agent has to tell him, she's not that nice.
Yes.
Trust me. She's horrible.
Right. But it's funny because he said, I had no idea you could do this. And at some point, and I don't know what happened, he got the idea he wanted to see me for it. And I was in New York, and he was out here, and so they asked me if I would read the script and tape scenes from it. And then he called me right away and said, I want you to do it.
Now, he says you made 2 tapes for
Yeah.
him, playing Kate Grant in 2 different ways. What were those 2 different ways?
Well, the first way was what was most natural to me, what you see on screen, basically. And the second one we took down. She was not as loud, just a quieter woman, really, and not as volatile. And, I mean, I think the anger was still there, but it was just a lower keyed take on the thing. And the reason he wasn't there to tell me what he wanted, so in truth, I had no idea, what he wanted in this woman.
Do you think he knew?
He probably had an idea, but I'm sure that the fact that he saw, that first version especially of it,
But that's
probably gave
interesting.
him more ideas.
Then they could be a contrast, so he could
Yeah.
see wherever it was he was thinking.
And my feeling was, certainly you can do anything different ways. And so I just felt that I should say that to him, and that's what I did.
Now, I feel like, there's this story that Harrison Ford tells about being a young actor trying to make it in the studio system, and he wasn't having much success, and a studio executive said, look, I want to show you something, and there was a scene that Tony Curtis did when he was very young, where he played a bellhop, and he said, what you're not doing in these, you need to be more interesting in these smaller roles. See, you look at this, and here's Tony Curtis, that's a movie star. And Ford said, I thought you were supposed to think that was a bellhop. And I think of you, as I said before, you were not a household name. You've been working steadily your whole life, but the name June Squibb was not, you were not a movie star. And I think, do you think that's because you're an actress when you play a housemaid or when you play Cousin Gretchen?
Yeah.
People see
that
person
yeah,
and not
that's true.
the performer.
Yeah.
So what changes with Kate Grant? Because she's not much like you. You are very nice and very sweet.
Well, I think it's a magnificent role to play. And in the movie, as Alexander says, it's a bigger role too, June.
You get a chance to wind up.
Right, yeah. I mean, you get the opportunity to lead up to things. And I think that, the ability to surprise people. Because that, to me, is the element of the most important element for good acting is if you can surprise people.
She's definitely
And
surprising.
I think she is, yeah.
When you first see her, I think you think, oh, I get it. She's this harridan who picks and picks and picks at her husband. And then I think it's that cemetery scene when she shows up in the middle of this road trip and you realize, my goodness, there's a whole lot more to her than we've seen. But now we've seen it.
Now we've seen it. And that was funny because, when I read that in the script, I thought, oh boy, wow, this is going to be fun. And then my only worry was where he was going to shoot it from. I really didn't know. And they had the camera going all over the place. And I kept thinking, wow, well, all right. We'll see what happens.
There's certain mysteries in the movies that will never be answered. What Bill Murray whispers to Scarlett Johansson at the end of Lost in Translation.
Yes.
And whether Kate is wearing underwear.
Right.
We'll never know. I wondered, that scene is so funny to me, and to think back on it, but I had like a dual reaction to that scene. On one hand, she's hilarious. The things she's saying are so outrageous. On the other, didn't you guys feel this way? she's so cruel in the way she's talking about Woody's family that she really just doesn't see him. And I wondered if that is something that you were thinking about, or if you just played it for the laughs, and that it's Bruce's performance that gives that secondary note.
Yeah, well, it certainly didn't play it for the laughs.
Mm-hmm.
And when I turn around and say to him, "You're lucky I took you away from here," I see him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw him the way the man looked. I think this is a woman who is, in situations like this, she's had it. And I don't think she thinks in terms of her husband, whether she's hurting her husband or not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that she really feels that she has done him a favor by taking him away from this place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that she thinks.
She's just being blunt.
She's just being
telling it how it
herself,
is,
yeah.
and not thinking of his feelings.
Yeah.
Now, the scenes with the family, I think, are just so wonderful. I'm from Pittsburgh originally, and I think I told you this.
Yeah.
I think you could rename this movie Western Pennsylvania and not change anything about it except that, and it would because there are just, I think there's a Midwestern vibe. There's a stoicism, and it's not meant to be an insult or anything, but there's just a very quiet introversion to some people in the culture of some of these small towns across America. Maybe did that seem familiar to you, having come from Vandalia, Illinois?
Oh, yes. When I read the script, and then when we were out there, I had been in Omaha before about Schmidt, but I had never been, where we were, down in the farmlands in the country. And it is, I mean, everybody's saying, why did he do it in black and white? But that land is black and white when you're there, in the winter.
Especially
when we
in the winter,
were,
yeah.
And the people's clothing, they're not wearing bright colors. They're not wearing red jackets. They're all gray and brown and, black.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is, I think that Alexander loves Nebraska, Omaha, these people. I mean, he truly does. He cares for them. And the scene of the men who are watching the football game, I've seen that in my own home in Illinois.
Me too, watching the Steelers.
Yeah. But, keeping an eye on that TV and trying to talk to you at the same time.
Yeah, and not really
not
succeeding.
Yeah. I've seen this. So, I just think that he has dug into what he knows of this country and these people.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Kate is such a blast of color in this black and white landscape, because she, everybody else is keeping it in, keeping it close, or not really thinking about it, and she's just letting him have
letting it out.
It must have been a lot of fun to play.
Oh, it was. Yeah, it was.
What's the mood like when you tell everybody to fuck off? Is everybody just laughing, high-fiving you after that scene?
Well, everybody loved it, yeah. But the thing was, we went into that with him not knowing what he wanted. And I knew this. So I just threw some out, what I felt. And then we started just shooting over and over and over again, the whole scene. But we would, to get up to that. And it was interesting because when I did the one, I felt this is it, and that's what he took. And I just knew that this was it.
Another scene I love, and it's not the one most people talk about, but I think it's the only time in the movie that Kate is not being herself, where she's putting on an act, and that's after they try to steal the compressor, and she has to pretend like she's just, taking a nap in the car or something?
Yeah. We're resting. We're resting.
She has that sweet little smile, like, just sitting here taking a rest. No, nothing to see
That's
here.
actually my favorite scene. I love
Why?
that.
Tell us why.
Well, it was fun to do, for one thing, and I am amazed at what he got. I really didn't know, because it was like we were playing the scene. Both Bruce and I were. And to try to get something out of him is impossible. You know, he was not going to react at all. And then
You mean as an actor or the
Yeah.
character?
the character. I mean, I think it was right,
Mm-hmm.
but it just left me with these two people and not knowing what to do with them. You know, I really didn't. And so, I mean, we shot it, I think, maybe 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved, you know, what he got. I really do. I enjoy watching
Great scene.
it. Yeah.
Tell us about working with Bruce Dern. I think you two, even though you've had different careers, they're parallel in some ways. A lot of people are talking about him having worked his whole life and now getting a role, a big juicy steak of a role
Right.
to sink his teeth
Yeah.
into, just like you got. He was doing supporting work in film and television. You were doing stage work. Did you feel a kinship with him?
Yeah, and also Alexander took he and Will and I out for a week earlier before shooting. And he really wanted us to get to know each other, and he drove us around to all the locations. So we were spending hours in the car together. And he loves to tell stories.
Bruce
loves stories. So, I mean, you know, I got a lot from him in those few days. And then we started shooting, and he's so supportive.
Is he telling old war stories, working in film?
Hitchcock, I mean, all the different directors, you know, and everything. And, well, Will and I would sit there when we were shooting, and if the, you know, camera stopped, he starts the story. So Will and I, we're both listening, you know. Wow, really? I mean, it was, you know, fun.
You're right, no one can tell a Bruce Dern story the way he can.
The way he did, yeah.
But do you have a favorite Bruce Dern story that he shared with you?
That he shared with me. Well, I love when he talks about his family. And not, I mean, it's painful for him.
Yeah.
It really is. And it obviously was a family that the wealth sort of made them act a certain way.
They were aloof.
Yeah, and it was a
him.
very cold family. And it always affects him. And I feel, my God, this is the most honest man in the world. I mean, he's told me different things, you know, maybe not all at once, but I think I've gotten the whole story of the family.
Yeah. He was sort of a cast out.
He was.
And never...
And this thing, you know, he'll tell you, I had to raise my hand to talk at dinner, you know. And
well, the scene
it's
when he
very
goes...
sad.
The scene in the movie where Woody goes through the house, Bruce, you know, when I've interviewed him, says he was, even though that was a different, they were a different class maybe, these were not wealthy people that Woody came from, but that his family, he was thinking of his family and where he was restricted from going, how he was treated in his house. And he tells you, right, they're very heartbreaking stories.
Yeah,
and he was sharing that with you on set.
Yeah. And you know, through a whole period of time, you know, if not the whole thing, but little by little, I think I got most of the, you know, the story of his childhood.
And how about working with Will Forte, who's another guy doing such different
so
work?
So sweet, such a great guy. And he really was sort of like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? You know, like this. And he would be working with Bruce and I, and he would say, I'm sitting here with you two acting. You know, I mean, he just really didn't know what he was doing half the time. But he was brilliant. And we would sort of pat him on the hand and say, it's all right, Will, you're fine. Just keep saying the lines. We're all good here.
But you must know what that's like, what he's going through. Here he is, he's known for comedy.
Yes, yeah.
And you were once known for musical comedy and changed
and then
gears.
Changed, yeah.
Were you the type to give him advice, or did he not need any guidance? He was already on
I
his
don't
way?
think,
Sit there and sagely tell him.
Yeah, no, I don't give advice.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody asked me, I might, but I mean, I just think it's such a personal thing that I have no idea what he's going through or how he's doing it.
Bruce is quite a fan of MacGruber.
Yes.
And we'll say
The bare butt.
yeah, he goes there. Look at he was trying to praise Will Forte when I interviewed him. He was talking about you and Will, and he said, "Look at these other actors who who are getting all this attention, and there Will was in MacGruber just a few years ago, running around naked with a piece of celery up his ass.
Yes.
All I can think is like Will Forte has to be saying, thank you, thanks for the
I
compliment,
think Will's
Bruce.
used to it
Yeah.
by now. But he really, and then he just did another film, Run and Jump. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's quite good, and he's quite good in it.
Often comedians make very interesting dramatic actors.
Yeah, I think they have a sense of fear, a sense of drama, you know.
Yeah, often
I think he's great.
when they get given the chance,
Yeah.
they often can really surprise you. Now, the film went and premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. After you finished, you must have known you had a great role and that you nailed it. When did people start saying, you know, June, you might get an Oscar nomination for this?
Well, we opened, and the next day they were giving me releases from papers, like all over the world, The Guardian and different
You opened
ones.
at the festival or opened?
At the festival, at Cannes. And they were saying then that the film and Bruce and I should be nominated for the Oscar. And I mean, that's sort of unbelievable, you know, when you read this. And but the film got a 10-minute standing ovation at Cannes, and they were watching subtitles. I mean, you know, but I think we realized very soon, and I don't think any of us had any idea this was happening.
Do you let yourself indulge in that, like maybe, or do you try to keep your feet on the ground and say, well, I'm going to wait and see until I get my hopes up, or did your hopes go up right away?
Well, no, it's not, you know, I don't think it's a question of hopes, but it's a question of, I read enough that I would have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to see that
So it wasn't
people
you
thought,
deluding
yeah,
yourself.
right.
This was,
You know, other people were saying it, that I should be up for a supporting Oscar.
And what's your experience been like? Because it's not just the Oscar, it's a whole award season.
thing, yeah.
People say out here in LA, we don't have seasons. We have fire season, we have award season.
Yes.
You know, rainy season.
Yeah.
What's your experience been like on this as somebody going through it for the first time? What surprised you about being part of that awards conversation?
Well, I think it's, and I suppose because I'm around so many people that have done it before, it's very low key. I mean, the red carpet tends to be a little higher, but then when you're in there at the dinners and the awards and the whole thing, I think that surprised me.
Is there much interaction between you and your fellow contenders in that category? Do you cross paths with Lupita Nyong'o and Jennifer Lawrence?
Yes, Lupita, we were at a party together, and I went up and I said, I'm June Squibb. I said, we're in this together, so I think we should know each other.
Yeah.
So she very graciously gave me a hug and said, thank you, and we now talk. I mean, every time I see her, you know, we give each other a hug and talk for a little while. And Julia Roberts came up at the Golden Globe and introduced herself to me and her husband.
As I was telling you yesterday when we were at the, or earlier in the week when we were at the, I happened to be seated at June's table at the Oscar nominees luncheon. I think there's so many movies this year that just need Kate Grant in them. I think August Osage County, all their problems would be solved if she came in and just let them all know what she thought.
Laid 'em low.
I think we want to go now to some of the questions from the audience here. And we have a few that are from online, so people who are watching remotely. But before we do that, I have one more just for myself, since we're talking here at the Screen Actors Guild. Tell us about when you got your SAG card.
I got it in New York, and it was for one of those CBS afternoon specials. It probably was like the middle 60s, I would think. And it was, I played the motel owner, and a school was making the kids to learn about family, pretend to be married and have dolls for babies.
How to be parents.
Yeah. And they were to carry through with that. I don't know why they were at the motel. I can't remember that exactly. I really can't.
All right.
No, I don't. It was an afternoon special.
All right. Just saying. I don't know why high school kids would be going to a hotel. So, all right, this question, you've been out and about, this comes from online. You've been out and about on behalf of Nebraska since the summer of 2013, yet you're always smiling and appear to be having the time of your life. What is your energy secret for the rest of us that are ready to collapse from award season? So this is someone who's a part of it. This is a legit question. I want to know how she does it.
Yeah.
Love, Gina from the Paramount Awards office.
Oh! Well, I've always had energy. I truly have. And I don't know why, I guess good genes, if nothing else. But I really, truly have had an abundance of energy. I think that 8 shows a week and all of that kept it going.
Yeah. Now here's a question from Elizabeth Sung. She says, what are some suggestions you can share regarding keeping your career active and alive when it's challenging for women who are over 50? How do you go about finding rare and wonderful scripts? So since you started screen acting later, I think you were 60 when you started,
Yeah.
right? What suggestion would you have to other actresses who were your age when you began doing film and television?
You have to take what you're offered, for one thing. I think that, and that sounds not smart, but I think that you have to work to make people want you to work with them. And
so don't be too proud to take a smaller role.
I think you have to take whatever's there. And then there comes the point where you don't anymore, But I think that you have to be seen as working, as a working actress.
And then make those small roles distinctive.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
If you can stand out.
Yeah.
So this is a question from Scott, who's somewhere here in the room. He says, June, what do you like to do when you are not working?
Well, I like to swim and read and go out to dinner. Those are my favorite things.
Where do you like? Give us a restaurant recommendation for
A restaurant
where can we find you holding court?
Well, you can find me at Pineapple Hill in Sherman Oaks.
That sounds good.
So it's a saloon.
You're not tap dancing on the bar, are you?
But the food's wonderful. It really is. Great food.
So this is a question from Gwen. Where do you feel the most work for a character actress is? Los Angeles or New York?
I think Los Angeles basically because of television. I mean, there's a lot of TV in New York now. And I just feel that they use age much more and better than film or stage do.
Now you're doing a lot of television. You play Lena Dunham's grandmother on Girls. You've shot how many episodes of that?
Just one.
Just one.
Yeah. It's going to be showing the night of the Oscars. I was just told that today.
You're competing with yourself.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you were also on another HBO series.
Getting On.
Getting On.
Yeah.
Playing, I think it's described as a homophobic, racist, obscenity-spewing woman in the hospital. Bipolar. And here, Alexander Payne thought you were too nice. Now is everybody thinking you're too mean?
You're too mean, yes, probably.
Is that kind of fun to play?
That was great.
Do you think that your sweet appearance makes casting directors want to put those dirty words in your mouth?
Oh, I don't know.
You think that's part of the contrast and the fun of it?
Yeah. But that's true, though. I mean, it's funny because everybody thinks when an older person curses that it's very funny. It's true. In television,
It's because they were always the ones when you're young telling you not to curse.
Don't do that. Yeah.
So this is from Katrinka. She says, who is your favorite director besides Alexander Payne and why? So I guess one of your favorite directors that you've worked with. And is there a director you'd love to work with whom you haven't yet?
I'd love to work with Steve McQueen. Yeah. And I loved Frank Oz, who I did In and Out with. I saw him at the Governor's Award thing, too, Governor's Ball or whatever.
You mentioned Steve McQueen, and at that nominees luncheon, I chatted with Alfonso Cuarón, and he said, it's interesting because you're here competing with each other, but then you're thinking, I could maybe use him in my next movie or her in my next movie.
Yeah.
Does that happen? Did you end up talking with Steve and hitting it off?
He stood in front of me, and so when he came up, he shook hands with everybody around him, which not everybody did, and I thought that was so lovely. And, you know, we all kind of chatted together there. But I was with Faden, Papa Michael, our cinematographer.
So here's a question from Jason. Since you said you don't give advice, he's asking, what is the best and most useful piece of advice you have received?
Well, I don't know if I received this, but I think that we should not be worried about what someone else thinks, especially in our profession. I mean, you cannot let somebody else, you know, make or break what you want to do.
And Jason also asks, what's the worst advice
The worst advice.
you've been given?
I don't know. I must have had some bad advice.
You've already forgotten it.
I have.
You've left that in your rear view. Okay. Here's a question from Julia. I think it's Steinman, if I'm reading the handwriting correctly. Did you always know you were in it for the long haul? And were there any times when you had dark days along the way where you thought you might not continue in this profession?
I always knew, you know, that this is what I was going to do and this is what I am. And of course I had dark days, but I don't think I ever thought I wouldn't do it. I used to say, I don't know what to do, for one thing. I mean, I have no idea what I could do otherwise. And I have to do. I mean, I'm not one of these people that, you know, can sit back and even enjoy things I enjoy. I couldn't do that.
You like
all
to
the time.
work.
Yeah.
You mentioned Alexander said, well, this is a bigger part for
Yeah.
one. But did you ever have frustration that you weren't getting those bigger parts?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And how did you deal with that?
Well, again, I just kept working, you know, and I always feel that if I read a script and I feel that I personally can do something with this, then I want to do it. So no matter what size it is, that makes me feel I really want to do this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, June Squibb.
You're welcome.
For joining us. And thank you for a great audience. Ladies and gentlemen, June Squibb.